Workers in Brazil have begun the first general strike against the government of President Jair Bolsonaro. From midnight, trade unionists across the country walked off the job, like these public sector drivers in Duque de Caxias. The strike was called on May Day by all the main union federations and focuses mainly on Bolsonaro's attempts to push through a pension reform, which they say will make it difficult for many workers to retire.
We close the avenue because this is an important day, because everyone knows how important the retirement system is, especially for youth, women and rural workers, and people are protesting across the country. This is a historic day that will affect us for years in terms of human rights and conquest, and in terms of the quality of life for the Brazilian working class, especially for young people like myself.
We know that this pension reform is a fraud, it's a lie, and the working class is going to pay a high price for it. That is why we are out here.
Let's hear from our correspondent Brian Mir, who is following the strike in Sao Paulo.
I'm standing on Avenida 23 in downtown São Paulo, where participants in today's general strike have shut down one of the busiest avenues in the city during rush hour. Now, the strike is going on in hundreds of cities across Brazil. In many cities, the buses and trains are also on strike, and the demands are that Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil's far-right president's neoliberal retirement reforms are cancelled. The reforms call for passing management of the pension fund over to the private sector, to the private banks, based on the Chilean model, which has led to widespread poverty among senior citizens and one of the world's highest senior citizen suicide rates. Now, this coming on the back of two massive education strikes, which rocked the nation, just show that the momentum against the far-right president and his government is building in Brazil.
That was Brian Mir from Brazil. Friday, June 14th marks 2 years since a fire at Grenfell Tower in West London claimed the lives of at least 72 people. The 24-story tower block had turned into a death trap in the early hours of the morning as civilians looked on helplessly. Firefighters rushed to the scene of the blaze that would turn out to be the worst UK residential fire since the Second World War. That night, 72 lives, including those of at least 18 children, were lost. 2 years on, there is rising anger at the slow pace of justice and continued risks posed by buildings using similar combustible materials to those which burned in Grenfell. And survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire and the families of the victims have come together to lay wreaths at the foot of the 24-story tower before staging a silent march through North Kensington on Friday evening. A day of remembrance began with a morning memorial service at nearby St. Helen's Church, where families were joined by government ministers who this week were accused of stalling on actions to prevent similar tragedies. A number of events are taking place to mark the second anniversary of this disaster. And yet another touching tribute to the Grenfell Towers were lit green overnight. The building was covered in a banner featuring green hearts with a sign at the top saying "Grenfell forever in our hearts." A public inquiry revealed that highly combustible material in the tower's cladding was the primary cause of the fire's spread. The tragedy put inequality in the spotlight and showed how poor multi-ethnic communities are often ignored. More than 200 high-rise buildings with similar cladding are yet to have work to remove it. British political commentator Gary Young is calling the Grenfell Tower a charred monument to neglect by the powerful, who only see tragedy when it suits them. In an article in The Guardian, Young said this fatal blaze in the heart of Britain's wealthiest borough signaled the bracing arrival of the four horsemen of the late-stage capitalism: inequality, austerity, deregulation, and privatization. In other news, the U.S. request to extradite the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from Britain will go to a full hearing in February next year. The decision was made an hour ago during an initial hearing at Westminster's Magistrates Court as supporters of Assange protested outside. He faces 18 charges in the United States of spying and leaking classified military and diplomatic papers. Many of them provided evidence of war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our correspondent, Pablo Navarrete, was outside the court and sent us a report.
Here outside Westminster Magistrates Courts, around 50 Julian Assange supporters have gathered as a hearing in relation to the extradition request made by the Trump government for Assange to be extradited to the US takes place. Now, apparently in Court 3 or in Room 3 of the magistrates, they are hearing that extradition request, what promises to be the beginning of a month-long a couple of months long process. Now Julian Assange, as we know, is in Belmarsh prison in the south of London, where he has been held since mid-April, when the Ecuadorian government revoked his asylum status and the British government arrested him in the Ecuadorian embassy. Now the Trump government wants to extradite him because, and there is an 18-charge indictment that includes charges under the Espionage Act for revealing US government secrets that include war crimes committed in places like Iraq. So Assange's supporters have gathered here, as well as a range of different media, to see where this substantive hearing in relation to his US extradition request, what happens with that.
UK. Caribbean community and Cuba begins this Friday morning in Guyana. The foreign ministers of the 14 CARICOM countries and Cuba will meet with the objective of promoting solidarity and regional integration. Issues of mutual interest and those pertinent to the region are expected to be discussed, including the situation in Venezuela. Climate change will also be high on this meeting. Trinidad and Tobago and Ghana are backing dialogue and diplomacy to ensure peace in Venezuela. This was made clear by Trinidad's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo as the West African leader continues his Caribbean tour.
As the international efforts are being made to bring about dialogue within the Venezuelan context, between Venezuelans, other countries of the world are trying to encourage them. And Ghana's role as a leading West African and African country, and on behalf of not just Ghana but the Caribbean and Venezuela, Ghana would do well to assist in ensuring that there are diplomatic initiatives maintained towards a peaceful solution and a speedy solution to the Venezuelan problem.
On the African side, whatever we can do also to assist those on this side to be able to have a positive resolution of the crisis in Venezuela. I think it is our moral duty to do so.
Coming up, protests continue in Honduras. Now they're calling to remove President Juan Orlando Hernández. Don't go away.
Who's moving the Jasmine? What interests motivate the actors behind each event?
Se despliega el tablero.
Uncritical Moves investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The Venezuelan government has been meeting United Nations representatives in the country to strengthen cooperation. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said they had evaluated together the government's plans to help victims of the economic war and that she had invited UN agencies to support it. The plan aims to assist those most affected by the blockade imposed by the United States and its allies. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has already expressed support for the talks with the opposition that began in Norway.
We have had an important meeting with the UN agencies that are here in our country. As President Nicolás Maduro said, we have agreed to expand and deepen collaboration in all the areas we have been working in. And we have also asked for some aspects of the Plan of Patria to be included, which haven't been considered yet. So we are working to include them.
Colombia's Defense Minister Guillermo Botero has survived a motion of no confidence filed by the opposition that wanted him to be removed from office. Botero stays on with 121 votes for and 20 against. The opposition filed the motion last month after an article in the New York Times exposed Army orders to double the number of combat kills and captures. The minister is also embroiled in additional controversy over his conflict of interests and of his private security company that is overseen by the Defense Ministry, and also his attempts to allegedly cover up the murder of a former FARC member. We have a special report from our correspondent in Colombia about the worsening situation in rural communities as residents are forced to leave due to violence.
Colombia's Ombudsman's office has issued an alert regarding the massive forced internal displacements throughout the country.
The Nariño department accounts for 43% of overall displacements, 3,540 people. This is evidence that forced displacements continues, and we are worried about the lack of guarantees to protect the rights of the population.
For Marco Romero, director of the Human Rights and Displacement Consultancy, CODES, the figure is only a small fraction, which shows how deep the armed conflict goes in Colombia.
People are facing expulsion from their territories, and others dare to speak about ethnic cleansing. There's an obvious strategic interest in those territories, and historically, a lack of protection.
The Colombian departments demonstrating the largest figures of forced displacements are the same ones which have seen murders of social leaders. For several people living in the rural territories, it shows a clear interest behind the humanitarian situation.
This is a geographical war. They want to complete large economic projects, but us, indigenous people, are settled in the areas that they are interested in. These areas, such as Chocó and the Pacific, have resources that they want to exploit. It's not just about drug trafficking routes. They want to clear those territories to start mega projects like that Atrato Truandó, Interoceanic Canal, Tribuga Gulf, and railways for the Pacific.
While many are being forced to leave, others are being confined, and the figures are growing. 12,773 people have been affected by this situation. All of them are part of ethnic groups and communities which are still waiting for the social investments which were promised by the government.
Dozens of Colombian refugees who have been displaced by the armed conflict are seeking assistance from international organizations in Ecuador, but they haven't found help, just neglect, and sometimes police repression.
80 people, among them children, disabled and senior citizens who have fled the armed conflict in Colombia, are stationed outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in deplorable conditions. They say they won't leave until the organisations offer guarantees, among them security and safe passage to a third country.
We call on human rights defenders to help us. We are single mothers that are fleeing in order to save our children.
Many of them are refugees who receive threats from organised armed groups in Colombia, and the authorities have failed to protect them. In fact, they've used police to evict them by force.
How can this happen? I was in my house on Thursday, and they barged in and burned everything to the ground.
The Colombian consul should have been here, but she shunned us and called us liars. She is aware of the conflict, and she should have known that our rights and our lives are in danger. She needs to be here.
We tried unsuccessfully to reach out to a representative of the High Commissioner. Meanwhile, Colombian refugees fear they will be criminalized.
We are aware that they are looking for ways to have us removed.
They label us drug dealers and members of the guerrilla. We are constantly keeping watch to ensure that they don't play arms and drugs on us, to then say that we are criminals.
It's been more than 10 days since these Colombian citizens have camped outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Quito. They say they won't be moved until they have answers and, above all, protection for their families.
The Association of Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo in Argentina revealed the identity of grandchild number 130, who disappeared during the last dictatorship. Javier Matias recognized that he had recovered his identity thanks to DNA tests. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
It's a day to celebrate amidst a challenge currently experienced in Argentina. We are at the headquarters of the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo organization, and as you can see, the room is packed. The grandmothers have released the identity of grandchild number 130, Matias Javier Millacuch de Rux, son of Elena and Javier Matias, who disappeared from Buenos Aires in December 1977. It's an emotional moment for Matias' relative, who have spent 40 years looking for him. Matias was willing to be a part of this conference led by the organization's president Estela Carlotto. It's a moment to reflect and a time to call on the community to keep searching for more details about his parents. For 42 years, these women with white handkerchiefs have struggled for justice.
Edgardo Esteban from Argentina. And there is no let-up in the protests by doctors and teachers in Honduras. But now some are proposing a wider movement to overthrow President Juan Orlando Hernández and install a constituent assembly. Gila Silvestrucci reports.
Protests are continuing on main streets across Honduras until President Juan Orlando Hernández offers transparent and credible talks.
The talks must be open. The media, like yourselves, need to know clearly what's happening, with no secret deals stitched up in the middle of the night. We want transparency.
The government still hasn't responded to the protesters' demands, while violent repression by the police and the military has increased.
They pulled me by the hair and took my backpack. They tried to take my phone, but I wouldn't let them. Show me your face, I said. Why are you hitting me? They say they'll take me away.
The government had offered talks, but on its own conditions, which weren't accepted by the teachers and doctors. The economic losses caused by the protests and roadblocks have drawn angry reactions, even among those who previously supported the government. While the protests continue, various sectors of society are anxiously discussing how to overcome the current political crisis. Politicians, businessmen, and church leaders are all looking for solutions. Some are suggesting a transitional government and a national constituent assembly.
Rather than a constituent assembly now, what we need is a process of transition that can gradually put an end to the dictatorship, and then we can think about a constituent assembly.
For others, the only solution possible is one that comes from the demands of those most affected by a situation where 70% are living in poverty.
There is no more room for traditional politicians to carry on in the same old way. Things have to change once and for all. They have to listen to the people and understand that that is the only way out.
The latest round of protests began as a union struggle, but now there is talk of a wider alliance of social movements that can bring everyone together to get rid of President Hernández and his government.
When we come back after the break, Peru celebrates the month of Afro-descendant heritage. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has met with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Kyrgyzstan. President Putin congratulated Modi on his recent electoral win. He also congratulated him for receiving the Order of St. Andrew, the highest honor bestowed by Moscow on April 12. Russia has had strong historic ties with India since the Soviet Union invested in the country following its independence from the British Empire in 1947. Since then, the two states have signed several treaties of mutual cooperation and friendship.
I would like to congratulate you on the confident victory of your party and your re-election as India's Prime Minister. Dear Mr. Prime Minister, we have done a lot for the development of our bilateral relations. Our relations developed steadily due to your personal efforts and attention to the development of Russian-Indian relations.
Sudan's ousted President Omar al-Bashir has been charged with corruption. According to state media, al-Bashir has been charged under foreign exchange possession materials, the heinous and suspicious wealth and emergency orders. He had already been charged with incitement and involvement in the killing of protesters in May. Al-Bashir was overthrown and arrested in a military coup on April 11th after months of mass protests against his 30-year-long rule. Also in Sudan, the African Union has stepped up its efforts to create a lasting solution to the political situation in the country. The African Union envoy to Sudan committed to a peaceful solution in the country as representatives from the United Nations and the European Union join mediation efforts. The AU is pushing Sudan's ruling military council and the opposition towards a transition to democracy. Talks between the military and the opposition were deadlocked before a crackdown which has led to at least 118 deaths. Prisons in Zimbabwe face critical medication shortages and overcrowding. The African country is facing extensive sanctions imposed by the United States, and many facilities lack ambulances and basic medication like antibiotics. Prisons like the Chikurubi Maximum Security Prison are designed to hold just over 1,300 inmates, but this jail currently houses more than 2,500 people. We go to sports. Copa America kicks off today in Brazil with 12 teams competing for South America's premier football title. Host Brazil takes on Bolivia in the inaugural match at the Morumbi Stadium in the city of Sao Paulo. 10 countries featuring in the tournament are part of the governing body of South American football, CONMEBOL, and 2 other international sides have been invited to participate, Japan and Qatar. Chile is the current holder of the Copa America and will try to retain the trophy against the continent's giants as they hope to win a 3rd successive title. In the last edition of this cup, Chile beat Lionel Messi's Argentina on penalties in 2016. Host Brazil is the current favorite, but playing on home soil isn't always an advantage, as we saw in 2014 World Cup. And June has been declared the month of Afro-Peruvian culture. It's an opportunity to discover and promote one of Peru's most hidden treasures.
In the Street of the Holy Spirit. That's the title of this play about the lives of African slaves and their struggle for freedom.
They don't tell us about this at school. They don't say anything about Afro-Peruvians being such an active part of the history and growth of this country. So it's very important to talk about it, and even better if it is in such an educational form as the theater.
¿Qué más si es a través de una forma tan didáctica como es el teatro?
The Afro-Peruvian community has played a prominent part in art and music. Their traditions have gained more and more recognition, like this black music, where the percussion box is the key instrument.
We give it a bit of a push, add harmony, make it full of joy, which we need to reach more people. We are talking whole of a tradition that came from Africa. But the percussion box is ours. It's pure Peruvian.
For Black activists, declaring June the month of Afro-Peruvian culture is an opportunity to promote the community's identity even more. But they say this is still not enough, because they say Black Peruvians still face serious discrimination. For example, at university, where only 10% manage to get a degree.
Only 1 in 10 finishes university, only 1. And that one will have a really hard time finding a job. Because even if you have the same qualities and the same qualification as anyone else, but then it comes to the interview, they look at your skin color, and that is what decides who gets the job.
According to the census in 2017, 3.6% of the Peruvian population is Black. And they are one of the most vulnerable sectors. 1/3 earn less than the minimum wage and live in poverty.
And with that, we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Enjoy the best content in spaces where you will discover new perspectives. Innovation. Well-being. Conservation. Equity. Traditions. A wide variety of contents that you will find on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Enjoy the best content in spaces where you will discover new perspectives. Innovation. Well-being. Conservation. Equity. Traditions. A wide variety of contents that you will find on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean. Who's moving the chess? What interests motivate the actors behind the